Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's WWF Wrestlemania, brought to us by Acclaim and Rare. The first licensed WWF game for the NES, but it wasn't the first wrestling game to be released for the NES. Released in January of 1989, this actually came out several years after several other wrestling titles, including my favorite game for the NES, Pro Wrestling. Wrestlemania features 6 WWF superstars from that era, each of which have a few things unique about them, including their theme song you can listen to in the game. But other than that, the game ends up being one of the weakest, if not the weakest, wrestling game available for the NES. Honestly, one of my favorite things about the game is the fact that Rare did the soundtrack to the game, and the music ends up being pretty cool. So here we go with WWF Wrestlemania for the NES. We start off with pretty much an exact copy of the cover of the game with Hulk Hogan there doing his famous shirt rip, and then we have Bigger, Better, Badder, WWF Wrestlemania. You can then play 1 up to 8 players taking turns, but then you have one of 2 different modes you really can play in the standard game. Just a one-on-one matchup, or you can do the tournament mode to find out the new WWF champion. The game features only one-on-one matchups, and since there's really only 6 wrestlers to choose from, that's really not necessarily a bad thing. We then get to actually select our wrestler after inputting our name, and as you can see we have Hulk Hogan, Ted Dibiase, Bam Bam Bigelow, the Honky Tonk Man, the 8th Wonder of the World, Andre the Giant, and the guy I will be playing as, the Macho Man, Randy Savage. Another thing cool about the game is, though they have a theme for the actual matches, during the match itself though, it'll actually start playing that particular wrestler's theme, done in 8-bit by Rare, which is pretty cool. After selecting your wrestler though, if you start off the tournament mode, we start off with a one-on-one matchup against Ted Dibiase. Now if you pick Ted Dibiase, you'll go right to the next guy in order, and that's just how it is. It's pretty much the same order every time you play. Now you're going to notice right away, it doesn't necessarily look the greatest. We can tell the difference between Macho Man here and Ted Dibiase, the $1 Million Man, and we have a health bar at the top of the screen. Only half of the screen, though, is actually the wrestling ring and the wrestling match going on. You basically have 2 different types of attacks, including holding in one of the buttons in order to actually do a run. Now, you actually can do a running kick, and then you have either the standard attack or holding up or down will do a different type of attack depending upon who you are, including for Macho Man, he either does the elbow or a headbutt. You can come off the top rope and do another big elbow move in order to do a lot of damage to wrestlers as well. The game really though is a giant button mashing fest. Basically break down your opponent all the way down to his energies as far as you can possibly get it down, and then pin them. Pinning is one of the toughest things actually to do in the whole game, as you have to actually hold down and then press B in order to actually jump on top of them for the count to begin. Since it's basically a button mash fest, the matches don't last too long. After defeating our first opponent, Ted Dibiase, we move on to Bam Bam Bigelow. Now, I definitely love Bam Bam Bigelow's sprite. Not only does he have the correct costume, but you can really tell they a little bit over-accentuated the weight here. However, from this point on, the game gets a little bit trickier. Finding the exact places for you to be able to stand and just keep mashing the attack button can be a little bit more difficult because the opponents seem to mash the button 10 times faster than you're going to be able to. One other weird thing about the game is each of the wrestlers has a certain object that will randomly be thrown into the ring. As you can see, we have flames flying across the ring right now, and after they get to the other side, they disappear. If the wrestler who is associated with that item picks it up, they get a little bit of a bonus for health. For example, of course, Macho Man has his sunglasses, and as you can see, Bam Bam Bigelow has his flames. While each wrestler only has a couple of moves to actually do in the game, I do give the game credit for actually having different moves depending upon the wrestler you pick. Unfortunately though, they don't have their signature or finishing moves in the game. You're not going to be able to pull off the shake, rattle, and roll with Honky Tonk Man, the big leg drop with Hogan, or even the $1 Million Dream with Ted Dibiase. The third opponent you end up facing off with is the Honky Tonk Man, the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. You gotta love the little added thing to the sprite of actually having the hair stick out a little bit, and doing a decent job of making him look at least somewhat like the Honky Tonk Man. The same strategy though that we've been doing will pretty much still apply here. One thing you really want to watch out for though is when beating up on an enemy when you knock them to the ground, stand at least a half a step or so away from them. Don't get right up on their back, because when they end up standing up, they do quick back punches to you, and they'll instantly knock you down to the ground after 2 or 3 of them, and you won't be able to get a move in. As we've been doing though, as soon as you knock them down to the ground, try to do your best to immediately get them back down to the ground. One thing that's interesting is, as you can see, the wrestlers will actually start flashing the more and more damage you directly do to them. I'm not sure if this is kind of an anger system that gives more power to a particular wrestler, as I really didn't notice a difference in a wrestler when they were flashing and when they were just standing there. You also do actually have a time limit in order to actually defeat the wrestler, so you have to actually do it pretty quickly. After defeating the Honky Tonk Man, we move on to the 4th opponent, the 8th wonder of the world, Andre the Giant. Now, Andre the Giant, of course, is the biggest, tallest sprite in the game, so they at least did that correctly here. And Andre is actually also the slowest wrestler, it seems like, in the game, but he's more powerful than most. He'll be able to do a lot of damage to you quickly, but if you quickly button mash your elbows and do your punches and headbutts to him, you'll be able to keep Andre down to the ground, and I end up finding Andre to be one of the easier opponents to beat in the game. In case you're wondering, Andre's special item that ends up appearing is a footprint. So I guess they just went along with the giant stature type thing and used a large footprint as his item. Though it's a little bit hard to tell that it's exactly a foot. After we knock Andre though down to the ground, we pin 1, 2, 3, and we move on to the 5th and final opponent, the incredible, the immortal Hulk Hogan. Now Hogan is the toughest opponent in the game, and that's pretty much what it should be. You know, Hogan, of course, the face of the WWF during the mid to late 80s and even throughout the 90s. Hogan does the most damage to you and always seems to be regaining health really quickly. I find it odd, though, that he ends up having a cross as his item. And besides Hogan's promos of say your prayers and take your vitamins, Hulk Hogan also wore a cross around his neck that was ripped off of him by Andre the Giant during the feud leading into WrestleMania 3. It is cool though that they were able to actually get a cross into the game, number one, with all of Nintendo's censorship, and it ends up being Hulk Hogan's item. Stay away from Hogan for the most part. Don't try to go in directly close to him unless kind of his back is a little bit towards you. This way you'll be able to knock him down. When he's getting right back up though, do what we've been doing to all the other wrestlers and quickly mash that attack button with the elbow to keep knocking him back down to the ground. Now Macho Man is one of the overall better characters in the game, so I'm not using the weakest character by any means in the title. After we knock Hogan down to the ground one more time though, we're able to get the 1, 2, 3, and Macho Man Randy Savage has beaten Hulk Hogan and is the World Heavyweight Champion. We get a congratulations, and then we get to see the WWF World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship belt there, and that's highlighted with all the nice stars going around it. And after a few seconds of that, it then goes to the credit scroll. WWF Wrestlemania, like I said before, is the weakest WWF game available for the NES, and there's actually a good handful of NES wrestling games available, not just WWF, but you also had WCW had a game, and a few other ones that were just kind of generic wrestling games, but are actually a lot of fun to play. If you're looking for the hardest challenge as far as this game is concerned though, you want to go ahead and pick the $1 Million Man Ted Dibiase, as he seems to be the weakest overall character and makes the game at least a little bit tougher. While it may be a poor wrestling game, at least WrestleMania did a couple things right. One thing I didn't get a chance to show though that is one of my favorite things is you actually can do the cartwheel that Bam Bam Bigelow is famous for in the game, and that adds a little bit more of the character development and makes the game just a tad bit better. But with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.